Have you noticed how complicated relationships can be sometimes? Someone might think that they're being clear and loving, but that's not how it's received at all. Some people have a hard time being authentic or saying no because at some level they're worried about not being lovable or even likable. Others feel like they're always being left out or don't belong anywhere. In this episode, we talk about why all that happens in the old paradigm and how things are starting to shift as consciousness rises and we move into the new paradigm. And after the discussion, we get to the most important part. The group frequency calibration associated with this episode is where the frequency work happens and where change actually occurs. So be sure to listen to that. Without releasing distortion patterns targeted by the GFC, the change you want will be more difficult to attain because you haven't addressed the root of the issue. If you like this episode, please help us out by hitting the like button so our content can find its way to more people like you. And please subscribe to receive our latest content. This also helps us to increase our reach so we can help and support more people. My name is Karen Cheong, and today in Mastering Your World Through Frequencies, we're discussing new paradigm relationships.
So we're going to talk about relationship in the new consciousness. Okay, so when we talk about relationship, are you talking about love or just any relationship?
I'm talking about any relationship because I feel like a lot of what we consider to be the foundation of our relationships as seen in the old consciousness is really mired in a lot of like heavy stuff. So we have love, which is obviously an important thing in any relationship, because if not, why would you be hanging out with them really? But it's often intertwined with things like self-sacrifice or the fear of being alone or the fear of being left, and all that sort of stuff like intertwines with love, and it can act out in this really weird way in relationship. I don't think we really know what it is to be really having a relationship that's based more in love and not in distortion.
Okay, so that's going to segue a little bit into the next question for me, because it's you've kind of answered it, but I'd love it to be just really clear for everybody listening. How is it different? So what I'm hearing you say is that there's this way that we've been in relationship, but you're saying there's a new way. How is it different is my question.
Sure, totally. So very basically, I think, when you're in the old paradigm and you have a lot of distortion running and you're not even aware of the distortion, right? It just kind of feels like your relationships play out in a way that sort of affirms who you are. So maybe you feel excluded or less than or not worthy or not seen or whatever those patterns are that we have when we have wounding around relationship. And most humans have wounding around relationship. Okay, I'm not talking necessarily just intimate partnership. I'm talking about relationships, whether it's relationships with your family, your friends, people at work, whatever. There tends to be wounding in our relationships, however that shows up for you. So in the old paradigm, when we weren't really aware of our distortion patterns, it would just play out over and over again in our relationships. And it would kind of often like make us anticipate certain things from people, expect to be treated certain ways from people, you know, or maybe we played out our control patterns through them. All that sort of stuff happened, and we were totally unaware. But as our consciousness is rising, because more and more of us are releasing our distortion patterns, we have more awareness. And we're like, wait a minute. The relationships I have, they're often this way, meaning they have self-sacrifice running through them, right? Like I have to give more of myself in order to be worthy of love, for example. Or I expect someone to leave me, right? And so you do all these behaviors to try to keep them from leaving. But when you, like I said, when you start to clarify and you see these patterns, you're like, I don't want to have this kind of relationship anymore. I don't want to have these patterns running through me. And it's really not about them. It sounds like I'm talking about them, like they're the problem. It really isn't. They're just an embodiment of the patterns that you are running. So you have to remember that we're frequency, and we are broadcasting a frequency out into the universe. And the universe responds by giving us the reciprocal physical experience, which looks like our relationships and everything else, really. But when you get into this new consciousness, because you've released enough of your distortion, you realize that, wait a minute, I don't need to experience this anymore. Can I experience something different? And the reason this is so groundbreaking is because it's never really been experienced like that before. We just assumed love was intertwined with all this distortion, but it doesn't have to be.
Okay, so there was two things I'd love to ask you a little bit more about when you get into this new consciousness. So are you saying that we are not there, all of us, and that we have to still do some stuff to get there? That would be one question. And then what is it that we should expect when we get there? Like from our relationships? You know, how is it different? I know you've described the old paradigm, but how is it going to be different, you know, when we get there?
Sure. So to answer your first question really briefly, many of us haven't been in the new consciousness. Many of us are moving into it. Some of us are there some of the time, in fact, more and more of the time, and are also living in the old consciousness a little bit, depending on who you are and what your distortions are and how aware you are and what you play out and what you're releasing in terms of your distortion. It depends. So I would say it's an ongoing process, let's just say, depending on who you are. Now, to answer your second question, what's the new consciousness like in terms of relationship? What can we expect? So we're giving, it's not known. That's the thing that's so exciting about it. It's not yet known. And that's why we're giving the retreat that we're giving in Bainbridge Island off of Seattle called, I think it's called Upgrading the Algorithm, Loving in the New Consciousness, because there is no map for this. And as we rise higher in our frequency resonance and are casting off what it is that we have been, how can you be in something where there's no map yet, where your lineage doesn't have a reference point for it? We haven't lived like this before. So that's in part what we're exploring in that retreat. And what does it mean to love without all that kind of fear, right? Because there's a lot of fear in love, yes? Like fear that we're going to be left, fear that we're not enough, fear that we're not worthy, fear that we'll be excluded, fear that we won't be seen. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on and on and on, right? Of all the fear that we have, that fundamentally we will not be loved, yes? What happens when you don't have that fear? How can relationship be? And what is it like if you're in relationship with somebody? Because, I mean, you're human, so you have all kinds of relationships, who isn't in the same place that you are in terms of their resonance or even awareness or desire to be aware. Okay, and please know, I'm not saying that we're better than. It's just that you're navigating what it's like to be you and what it's like to be in relationship with someone who may not want to be aware. Like, how do you do that? And then the other thing is about...
Or do you even do that?
Exactly. Do you even do that? That's exactly the point. I think it's a great point. And then the other thing, too, is that, you know, I think in the old paradigm, there's this kind of odd... I've heard it said a number of times, like people want to experience relationship with unconditional love.
Yeah, well, I mean, that frustrates me, that phrase. Because I think being human is a condition, full stop, the end.
Yes, I agree.
So there's a whole pile of conditions already established within us as a human being. So are we even able to love unconditionally?
Well, that's the question.
You know?
And the second is it required that we do?
Yeah.
Because the thing is, you know, unconditional love, what does that even mean? I don't know. I think it depends on who you ask.
Yeah.
Frankly. But if you're going to say that it's love without any distortion, I think that's almost impossible because as a human, you have distortion.
Yeah.
And the question you have to ask yourself, because a lot of people will say, they will say unconditional love, but they mean love with no boundaries, I think, right?
I was wondering that one too.
And so if it's love with no boundary, my question is, well, that's an interesting form of self-sacrifice in a way. You know, where it's like, I will take whatever love because I'm so open and so able to receive love. Well, I don't know that you need to take any love in any way. And I feel like there's a kind of strengthening and realization of self that happens as you rise in consciousness. I don't mean your human self. I mean you as infinite indestructible consciousness, aware of the gloriousness that you are. And anything that diminishes that is really not very well tolerated, because that's not the point. I mean, the point of the new consciousness is to feel your own magnificence, the amazingness that you are, how much you co-create, and to celebrate that in others. There is no diminishment.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think is also, I would love to add, is the understanding of your special connection to pure source.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And for me, like, I often think, now that love is like a radio station. You know, you kind of tune into it.
Yeah.
It's not that you're never connected to the radio and the stations and being able to access it, but love is something that you tune into. And there's all varying degrees or, you know, or colours or flavours of this love in whichever one you are experiencing, because underneath all that, you always have that connection.
Yes.
And that understanding of your pure source brilliance.
Yes.
So the whole idea of this unconditional love, for me, even though it's unconditional and it sounds like it should be expansive, it sounds finite.
Yes.
It sounds definite. And I don't think love is.
No, it's not.
You know, I think I used to think that.
Yeah.
And if I didn't attain this unconditional love, then I didn't have it.
Yes.
But actually now, from where I'm sitting now, I mean, goodness knows what's going to be in 10 years' time.
Yeah.
I sit there and I think, well, love has so many flavours and faces and colours and it does have boundaries and it does have expansiveness and shortness and width, and how can it be so boxed up called unconditional love?
Yes.
You know?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think the thing is, when you were talking about your own special connection to pure source, to me that's the beloved state.
Yeah.
When you recognize fundamentally that you are completely loved.
Yeah.
You know, and it doesn't really have to do with any condition, meaning how you are. So you don't have to do X, Y, and Z, check off the boxes, wear this, eat that, sleep this much, pray that much, meditate that much. It's not, it doesn't matter.
No.
Ultimately, you are beloved. And once we start to embrace that more, I think that's where the fount of the love comes from. Because it's just all that other love is a reflection of that fundamental love.
Yeah, so maybe that's where the unconditional love comes from. It's the unconditional love that you know pure source in yourself have.
For each other.
For each other.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the rest is just, like you say, a mirror of that.
Yeah.
And as glorious as that can be. So you're doing this workshop on this. So if people are watching this, what is the take home from that? I mean, what do I expect to get? You know, as a person watching it, and I'm looking and I'm searching, what am I going to take home? What am I going to understand at a deeper level?
Yeah. So I feel like for a number of people, it's going to be to clarify how intertwined love has been with these other distortions. Because I think a lot of people don't even know that. You know, we don't want to know it.
Yeah.
We just know that we want something desperately. We call it love, but we don't really know what it is.
Right.
Okay? But it's really our distortions playing out through this vehicle that we call love. So there's that aspect. And then there is the aspect of the knowing of yourself from a higher perspective.
Yeah.
And this belovedness that, you know, we have started to dip our toe into with the relationship with the one. But this is like, okay, well, if you can be in this state and you're in this beloved state, well, then how does relationship and love look then for you? Knowing that you sit in this place of the beloved, like it's infinite. There is no end to that love.
Yeah.
You can't stop it. It's always there infinitely.
Yeah.
So if you sit in that place of that knowing and of that feeling sense of that, first of all, it's glorious. And secondly, well, then how do you have relationship from that place where there is no diminishment of self, where there is, or the other for that matter, you know, where it can be something that is really beautiful and buoys both parties and just everyone around you because they get to witness it. And what can you learn there? And what are the challenges that you might be met with in your humanness? And all that stuff, which is navigating an entirely new experience, that is part of what we're exploring in this retreat.
Okay, so will you be also helping the awareness, like the person that attends, the person that watches afterwards, the person that's listening to this YouTube clip? Will there be an opportunity for that person to become aware of that old way of feeling about love or experiencing love, the distortion patterns? Will there be an opportunity for them to wake up to themselves?
Yes. Yeah, and that's actually the first part of the retreat, because I think you can't move into that state of knowing that infinite love until you know the other state. And the thing is, you know, like I said, we're so conditioned to it, we don't even see it.
Yeah.
Like that's just like, we just think that's what love is.
Yeah.
It's always been that way. I mean, it's been that way for generations. And you look at it and you're like, well, I mean, you don't even question it. you know? And then perhaps you might start to, as you get older, because you see other people having different experiences of love, and you're like, wait a minute, that's not like my experience. Like something's radically different between that person and me, and I don't know what it is. But it kind of is like an unanswered question. So I think that is really important, like you said, to be able to see where in that old pattern, that old way of being, how you've been, and to move away from it. Well, first of all, it's your choice. So to choose to move away from it is what I should say. And then to move into this other state, and then to start to explore and play in that state. Because really it's such profound freedom. And the thing is, for humans, when we have that much freedom, we kind of like freeze a little bit. We're like, you know, we don't know what to do. We're like, oh my God.
It's like watching my husband find a car park in a car park where there's lots of gaps. He literally freaks. Like,
There's too many places to park.
Too much choice.
Oh my God, that's awesome. Yeah. And then meanwhile, you're probably like, just park somewhere.
The car.
That's awesome. Yeah, totally. So that's exactly what it is. So it's like, okay. And then to recognize that in that state of that love, it doesn't matter where you park, in a way. Because he's just having different experiences in different places that he parks, right?
I'd also like to add, when you were talking about, you know, that glorious understanding of your relationship with pure source, that's special. And a phrase just came into my head. It's like, no matter what you do, you can't stop that love that pure source has for you.
You can't.
You can't stop it. It's always there, whether you choose to believe it or not.
Yeah.
I think that was one big, awesome awakening point for me. It's like, okay, it doesn't matter. I'm always going to be loved.
Yes.
And it took away the loneliness, the pain of feeling like nobody loved me.
Yeah.
You know, all them really human experiences that had caused this trauma.
Yeah, it's true, where it's like you feel outside of, you feel like you don't belong, you feel like no one loves you, that you are not lovable, that it's hopeless, really, because you never will be loved in the way that you yearn to be. And you're right, when you get to this place where you feel the beloved state, everything changes.
Yeah, it's like a 180.
Yes.
Is that the right?
Yeah, 180 turn. Yeah, it's like totally different.
Yeah, totally different. Okay, so for people that are watching this and people that might choose to come to the workshop, do you think that we can create a resonance in the mastermind that will allow folk to move into that?
Yeah.
Even to touch it briefly?
Yeah, exactly. And that's what the amazing thing is about frequency work, is that we all think we're doing our individual work, because we are. Because, I mean, I'm in relationship with all kinds of people, right, all the time. Yeah. We all are. And wouldn't it be amazing if our relationship with self within those relationships was better? So, but the thing is, yes, there's that individualness that we have, but when you do this individual work, especially in a mastermind like this, what happens is the ripple effect, which means that other people who you might not ever know, you'll never know their names, but they'll be able to entrain to a possibility that you embody of relationship in a whole different way. And this is how we start to change consciousness, right? This is how people can really have a radically different experience of life, because in you, there is the possibility of a human feeling that love, even if it's just for a moment, even if it's for forever. It doesn't really matter how you experience it. But as you start to live it more and more, for those of you who choose to do that, that means that others can do the same, and they can do it faster, which is amazing.
Okay, so with all that said, what are we going to do, or what are you going to do for us, the royal we? What is it that the GFC can offer for people that are listening? Because if I was listening to this and I'm full of the distortions and in that heaviness of the human experience in the lower levels of resonance, well, you know, I'm really going to be hoping that this GFC is going to just give me even an inkling of what that feels like.
Yeah. So for this GFC, what I'm going to be able to do is to actually have you rise in your frequency resonance so you can feel that difference. I'm not going to be able to get you to that place where you feel that like infinite unconditional love that you and I were talking about, because that's such a deep thing and it's so ingrained in our humanness. It takes more work to do that. Yeah. But in this GFC, I can get your resonance up high enough so you can be able to tell the difference between the stickiness of where you're at and where it is that you potentially move into.
Yeah, so you kind of get that bird's eye view a little bit.
Exactly.
Excellent. Let's do it.
Cool. So for those of you who would like to raise your frequency resonance and get a little bit of a bird's eye perspective on the distortions that are intermingled with love, then I suggest that you listen to the GFC that's associated with this episode. And if you've liked this episode, then please hit the like button and share it with a friend.
We're about to start the group frequency calibration, or GFC, where we actually do the frequency work and where change is catalyzed. To get to the GFC, click on the square that'll appear to the right or the link in the description below. It's time to bring in a new experience, a new consciousness, and a new world. Let's rise together.